Here we go. Hey, Freddie. So, welcome. This is Karen Elkins. This is Science to Sage, and this is where we explore the mysteries of the universe. My guest today is Freddy Silva, and we're discussing his new book, The Missing Lands. And as he said, it should be called The Missing Gods because they got around. What can we say, Freddie? This book.
Hindsight is so wonderful.
Well, I have to say, Freddie has a couple mystical powers, as well as in my own book, I questioned at the very end of my chapter, what was all of these things that you kept seeing that were ubiquitous everywhere? It didn't matter what continent, whatever. And I love Freddie's writing. So I saw Freddie had a new book, so I ordered it. And it answers all the questions that I have in the back of my own book. And Freddie's somebody who, unlike a lot of people, does an immense amount of research for whatever he does. So if you want to delve into anything, read a Freddie book. That's mine. That's my take on it. So
that's very good advice, boys and girls.
I think it's awesome advice. So we're going to delve into cycles, ancient origins, and the soul of civilization. That's where we're going to head to today with Freddie. So Freddie, for me, put all the puzzle pieces together that most people don't even think to ask. And part of his gift is the ability to look at language, look at multiple cultures, and see how they actually are saying the same thing. So let's start with the conundrum. How was it, as you said, from science, mathematics, astrology, all of a sudden seemed to hit in so many cultures at the same time, from Mesopotamia, from Egypt, to Yucatan, to Peru, to Japan, to China? Freddie, let's talk.
Isn't that weird?
Isn't that odd? And
yeah, it's one of the big conundrums of history, isn't it? It was suddenly we went from being cavemen and cavewomen to suddenly discovering astronomy and mathematics, suddenly discovering units of measure and, all the accoutrements of civilization. I mean, were we having the same hallucinogenic experience, which I'm totally open to as a possibility? Were we tapping into the same astral reference library? Possibly. Or did we inherit everything from someone else that basically was living a parallel existence on Earth, which is where all the ancient cultures discuss and come into focus with the same story around the world, which is an intriguing proposition in itself, since apparently our distant cousins weren't getting around that much because they were too stupid to get around. But if you read it from their point of view, which is what I like doing in terms of work, is looking at things from their point of view, not from the academic's point of view, because so much of our history comes from an Anglo-Saxon European central point of view, which is good up to a certain limit. After that, you lose track of what's what and who's who, because you've got to ask the local indigenous people, what do they call things? Why are these stories here? How did you come up with these incredible stories without understanding writing or without having any kind of civilizing influence? The stories, those things don't gel in my mind. You can't be stupid and create beautifully constructed stories and mythologies and legends at the same time. That shows that either you've inherited something, or it shows that you have come into contact with people who know the art of storytelling and can construct abstract concepts. Okay, so that's where the problem begins. We have to ask what the locals were up to. So once you start reading, for example, the 180 surviving flood stories around the world, it's pretty obvious that these people were eyewitnesses. They were writing things from observation, at least from the survivors' point of view, from a global flood. And then those people told their children, they told their grandchildren, and the story becomes memorialized, especially in an event like that, which is traumatic to begin with. It becomes hardwired into the fabric of your society. And every culture on the face of the earth, of course, spoke and remembered things through sitting around the campfire and discussing what came before around the campfire, and basically so that the people that came after would remember these events, because they would serve as the devices that would help them survive another cataclysm. Our predecessors were very much into observing the cycle of nature, not as a linear concept, but as a round concept. They knew that catastrophes come and go, people die and people survive. And this is why I find these stories compelling, because if our ancestors weren't speaking to each other, how is it that the stories overlap? And in some cases, they completely match. Australia, I mean, the Aboriginal culture, which goes back at least 1 million years now, which geologists have said that, yes, these people even remember the dates of meteorite impacts that we can only find now through satellite imagery. So how do they know that these little depressions in the middle of the desert were caused by meteorites, which hit the Earth 1 million years ago? That means someone had to be around to remember the event, and they told the story forward. So when you read things like the story of the Great Flood from 11,000 years ago, from the Australian point of view, from different cultures, from the north coast to the south coast to the east coast to the west, they describe the same event, but the water comes from different directions.
Ah,
You
okay.
see? So now you begin to realize they're not just making this up, they're watching things, because if you see it from their point of view, the direction of the water makes perfect sense relative to where they lived. And that's what got me excited about this story. How can we find out who was here before? Because one of the things that also underlies all their stories is that they claim there was another culture, and they call them human-like but not quite human. You hear this in the Andes, you hear this in Australia, you hear this in the Pacific, everywhere in the world, human-like but not quite human. And I figured, who are these people? Who are these gods? And why were they here? What did they want with us? And were they the people that gave us civilization?
You talk about three distinct, do I call them yugas? You call them different in the book. The three different distinct periods of time, and that
Oh,
over
the
the course,
dryas.
yeah, and over the course of time, we actually didn't get better. We actually got worse
Oh,
and
we got worse.
worse.
I mean, it's an odd fact of history that if you look at the surviving Sumerian tablets and the earliest Egyptian chronicles, they do paint a point in time where history is not supposed to exist.
Yeah.
The Egyptian gods, for example, they ruled for 36,000 years. That's in the Turin Papyrus. It's right there. It's a piece of historical evidence. And it gets thrown out by mainstream academia because no one was supposed to be housing a civilization that far back into our prehistory. So it gets thrown out. But the problem is it exists. And these people, these gods, lived a long, long time. The additional god Ra, who was considered to be a real person, not just an image of the solar symbol. This god Ra lived for 800 years, and we have the same thing in the Bible. We have people like Noah, who lived for 400 years, and the Sumerians have a king list that tracks for 140,000 years. The Sanskrit teachings also talk about the longevity of gods in the previous civilization. So someone was here already living for a very, very long time. And they went through their catastrophes and periods of growth and periods of decay, like everything does.
Mm-hmm.
But around 15,000 BC, we suddenly start getting into a big problem. We start getting the Earth is going through a field of debris somewhere in the solar system. It crosses a path of big rocks, and we get hit with big chunks which create the first ice age, which is the oldest dryas. And then that went forward about 1,000 years, where they picked themselves up again. They managed to restart civilization, and they got hit again with the old dryas. And then the people from that survived that, and their sinking land masses and the rising of sea levels, they're starting to face up to the fact that they're losing their original places of abode. So this is the time when in Egypt, we pick up the story where the gods are leaving their sinking continents, and they're thinking, we have to rebuild the former mansions of the gods. This is their exact words, in this new land called Egypt, or whatever they called it back then. And you have the story at Edfu, on the walls of the Temple of Edfu, that describe very clearly how a band of gods did come over to the Nile Valley about 10,600 BC, which is just within a couple of hundred years of the beginning of the Younger Dryas, which is the third period of catastrophe. And they began to build the original mounds upon which would stand the future temples. Again, these are their exact words. So the temples we see today are standing on very old foundations. And
For a second, it reminds me, because when we start looking at what we're discovering now with all the satellite stuff, you can see pyramids underneath water everywhere, from Japan to Cuba.
oh yeah.
And so that when you can see where the water sloshed in, moved over, the earth changed. You talk a lot about the axis changing, and when the axis change, it also moves the water over. So it's kind of tilting. And you did talk about it as a zodiac sign, as we're literally moving through the skies. We're literally rotating and even moving and inviting almost catastrophe through cycles of time. Are we not?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Egyptians themselves, when they were discussing the history or the prehistory with the Greek scholars who were just then discovering the culture of Egypt, they said, we're so old and you Greeks are so young. They're almost sort of putting them down a little bit. You know, we can date our time when the sun used to set in the quarter where it now rises, and it rises in the quarter where it now sets. So the Earth has already shifted on its axis several times.
Yeah.
It gives you a data again of about 36,000 years. And I said at one point, the Earth actually went upside down to the Egyptians at one point. North was actually south. And the Hopi have exactly the same story. Now, how are those two supposed to intertwine when they are over 5,000 miles apart? The two stories are completely overlapping and they reference each other. So there was a time when something very big hit the Earth, and yes, north became south, south became north. And I don't mean the North Pole, I mean the magnetic poles moved. I'm talking about the fact that the Earth actually moved in itself and somehow got corrected again. They describe it as a time of incalculable cold, where people lived underground, which probably accounts for a lot of the tunnel systems that we find all around the world. I mean, there is that theory, and it's highly plausible. This is why these tunnels were carved and used from time to time until people could survive. And there is the overlap with the Hopi story of creation, where there was that time when the Earth flipped on its axis, and they describe it very succinctly in their own language. And they had to hide underground until they could come up, and the weather was behaving itself again. Nature recalibrated. We don't know how long this took. And then they went back and repopulated the Earth just in time for a global flood to take over. So yeah, these people lived within like a 900-year period where they could flourish yet again, only to be faced with another cataclysm, which of course begins to explain why so many of the ancient monuments that we have track enormous spans of time, like in Central America. Why do you need pyramids to track 140,000 years of the sky? If you're a hunter-gatherer and you're a farmer, you don't need to know things that far in advance. All you need to know is where the moon is, where the sun is throughout the course of the year, when you're going to plant your crops, and when you're going to reap and sow. So for farmers to plan things over 140-year cycles makes no sense, unless, of course, you're keeping track of the sky to make sure you know where objects are, so you are prepared when the next cataclysm comes.
Well, what do you put us into, like when I think of the problems that we have, like people are calling it global warming, and I think, you know, we're going through cycles.
Oh yeah.
That's inevitable. And that at the point where we are supposedly in the cycle, we could be going back into that galactic point of the Milky Way where we could be bombarded again. Very
we are.
We're getting there if we're not already there. And what actually was reminding me, looking at the fires in Australia, there's a part in your book that talks about when it got so dry that the earth just scorched and burned.
Yeah.
Your book is very enlightening from many perspectives of what we're actually experiencing now.
Oh, I think that they meant for us to have these gods, if you want to call them by that. They meant for us to have this civilization, and they give us pointers to the fact that you've got to keep track of the sky. You've got to be in touch with nature, because this is going to come around again. And the luck always favors the prepared. Yeah. People die and people survive. It happened to us too, they said, and we're gods. Yeah. You know, we knew about the laws of nature. We knew how to manipulate the laws of nature. And look what happened to us. We got it too. Not all of us, because people obviously survived. And the reason that they survived is the reason why we're here. We appropriated their information. And the point that they were making is that the Earth goes through cycles, and there are certain points where the Earth rotates around its position in the solar system, where if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're going to come across some big chunks of rock. And I was, towards the end of the book, I was kind of trying to find some information that would correlate to this information. It turns out that there is a lot of mathematical, theoretical, and practical papers already done on the Earth's trajectory through space, specifically one time of the year. that we celebrate as the Day of the Dead around November the 1st, which I always thought to be a Celtic festival when you honor the souls that have gone, the earth is closing down its cycle, things are dying, you're kind of going within and you're preparing for the rise of the light back into the earth around the winter solstice. It's part of a natural cycle. I had no idea that they celebrated the exact same date in the southern hemisphere, which they shouldn't be doing. If you're going to celebrate November the 1st in the Northern Hemisphere, you're going to celebrate that date now in May the 1st on the Southern Hemisphere, because the calendars are upside down, you see. But everywhere you go around the world, they celebrate the Day of the Dead on November the 1st. And I was amazed to find in the Native American cultures in South America, throughout Polynesia, and in parts of Asia, that the celebration of the Day of the Dead was to honor the people that died in the flood 11,000 years ago. And so now you put one to one, what happened on the 1st of November that would have precipitated this memorial? And the only thing I could pinpoint, and many others have found this out as well, is that on November the 1st, we're going right through the torrid meteor shower, which throughout history, or at least throughout recorded history, has been the troublemaker. This is the bit, the chunk of debris that the Earth goes through. Every year for 2 weeks, we cross this massive path of a broken up comet. And sometimes there are small chunks, and we know because we look up at the sky on the 1st of November and go, wow, look at those wonderful meteor showers going past. Yes, unfortunately, at certain cycles during that process, the Earth goes and collides with very, very big chunks. And this is what people at Los Alamos were worried about, and also the mathematicians and astronomers are concerned about on the 3rd decade of this century. So if you're not into catastrophophobia, I suggest you put your fingers in your ears right now, because the era between 2030 and 2042 is predicted to be a cycle of great danger, which brings us back to Earth changes. Yes, part of the Earth change is man-made, undoubtedly. We have really messed up the planet. There's no denial about this. But we're also coincidentally coming out of a mini ice age, which is not helping matters as well. So, for example, in Northern Europe, and if you happen to be living in England, as I used to be, you'd only remember that even at the end of the Victorian era, the Thames used to flood every year. And we've only just now in Northern Europe come out of a mini ice age, which began around the 12th century. So the heating, the global heating that's happening is a result of this mini ice age, which itself was also caused by fragments of small comets hitting the Irish Sea and other parts of the Mediterranean. So all of these things are coinciding, and we're not helping. But the big thing that doesn't help is the fact that in the 3rd decade of the century, Earth is projected to go through the torrid meteor shower exactly at the points where those big rocks generated the big catastrophe. So this doesn't bode very well, but there is an antidote, and I won't ruin the end of the book because there is an antidote to this. And it's so cunning and so simple and so obvious that it took me 15 years to work it out. But the answer is there. And it does also coincide with the window of opportunity that the Maya talk about. We all panicked, or most of us panicked when the Maya calendar hit 2012, except for the Maya themselves that said, you know what, it's just like the odometer on a Volkswagen Beetle going to 900,099 miles and resetting to 0. The car still starts the next morning. It's a window of opportunity. It's a fulcrum point of a big window that lasts 60 years. And the Maya said, this is the window where things are going to change. And either we evolve with that change or we influence that change. But the change is upon us. It's how you influence. We do have the power to influence the outcome. And I won't say any more about that. But because by 2012, we have not hit that critical mass in spiritual thinking, the window is closing, and it means that from their point of view, and from many indigenous points of view, the Earth is now giving us signs to prepare, and the signs are upon us. The fires in the last 2 years, which are global, it's not just Australia, they're global. Yeah. Those were predicted by the Yuga cycle in India. They are right there. The next stage of the Earth's transformation will be through fire. I always thought it had something to do with the sun. It's actually going to be more local. It's the absence of water and the heating that's associated with it. But the Maya said that we have until 2042 for that cycle to complete. Within that window, we are running a big gauntlet with disaster. And again, the more prepared you are, the more people will survive. But the change is upon us. So within the seeds of this history and this destruction, all this negativity, are the seeds of the next generation of people and next generation of human civilization.
Okay, can I cheat a little bit, Freddie? Because actually, I think that gives an answer. But your book is so much bigger than that. Your book takes you. You have to go to the gods. The answer at the end is actually in the beginning of my book. In the beginning.
Oh, really?
Oh, it's totally in the beginning of my book. It's the part that every time I talk to a scientist, they go, "Oh, well, yeah, of course." And it's the part. I will leave a little teaser part, but I think here's the interesting part. And this is Gerald Pollack said to me, we're only made of three things: water, light, and particles. And any shaman knows how to move the elements. And these ones that were you call magical, mystical, or whatever, knew that. And one of the reasons was because it was them. We are made of Maya. We are made of those elements. And when I fly, and I do not, like when the air gets rough, I talk to the air. We have a conversation, and the plane generally always smooths out. So if we knew we were one with all the elements, because we are the elements, and that we are in tandem and can make a difference, not only in how we respect it, because I think that's utterly key at the end of the day, and how we mentally think about it. Now that goes back to, I'm going to go the very beginning part of where Freddy's at with, where were these gods? Where did they come from? And what is it that they knew that was so much bigger than us that they were trying to teach us? Because you even said in your book that it was simple.
Yeah, it's very simple when it comes down. We're looking for something big. We're looking for a big mystical experience and a big answer. Actually, it's not that big. And yet, paradoxically, it is, because the repercussions from that knowledge are profound. And it all comes down to understanding the laws of nature. That's what a god was in the old days. A god is a law of nature. It's a force. A light is a god. A plant is a god. Everything has its own inherent god. And any person, any human being that understands that law and can interact and influence it becomes as a god. That's where we get the understanding of God. Now, we've been kind of poisoned by the concept of God from a Christian Judeo point of view, which is a guy with a big beard, holding a staff, sitting on a throne, being very judgmental. Boom, wrong. In the old days, anyone who had the ability to communicate with nature, even just talk to an animal and heal through touch, that was considered to be a god, because you were basically assuming a form of nature. You could work with that form and you can interact and bend it to a certain degree. That's what gave these people special powers. It's not that special at all. We all have this ability. We just get it talked out of us by religion, by your parents, by pure crude logic, and then we forget that we have these powers. And that's what the gods were trying to do. They were saying, you can be just like us. We're not that special. It's just that over the course of X numbers of thousands of years, we've understood how to work with the laws of nature. We can bend nature to our will. In fact, if you read the original Book of Enoch, and from the Ethiopian version, not from the more synthesized later editions, and certainly not from Zechariah Sitchin's point of view, because there were so many factual and translation errors put into his work. Although I have to say a lot of his work also is very important.
Yeah.
You get to see how these people were saying that, yes, we had the rules, we knew the laws of nature, we could bend them at will, to the point where if we wanted chunks of big rocks to come towards the earth and create a flood, yeah, we could do that. And it's all a matter of using your God-given ability to use your intent and the power of attention to focus on certain things and draw them to you with your will. But there are rules that come with that, and that's where the wars of the gods come into play in so many stories around the world, where you talk about the gods also infighting. Like in India, for example, the Yuga cycles, the Greek cycles. The gods are a very dysfunctional family. Well, they're just like us. And there's the paradox. They want us to be just like them, but they're also saying, you know what? we weren't without fault either, because there were people who were also doing some very stupid things. You read about the original Anunnaki, the people of the serpent, who we call the Anunnaki. They had their good people, and they also had some pretty nasty bastards. Enki and Enlil. There were two siblings who, one was a very nice, light person who really wanted to look after the human race, and the other one, to quote my heritage, was an utter bastard. So they had their problems too. They had the same issues that we have, but their story was that, you know what, do what we did, imitate us, because you can go forward in your advancement and your level of civilization. Beware of the pitfalls. So we're going to give you the accoutrements of civilization. It's up to you to learn discernment, because it's about right action. But in order to understand right action, you have to understand the dark and the light side of things. And that was their big message to us.
Freddy, that you remind me, there's two things. One, does that bring us to the tree of life and the choices in the garden and the story we have, right?
Which is very different to the original story. When the serpent tells Eve, well, when you eat the fruit of the tree, you'll become as gods, because you'll understand the knowledge of how nature actually works. Some people don't want you to have that, because you become jealous to some of the gods, but most of the gods said no. If you can understand discernment, eat of the fruit of the tree and you'll become just like us. But there is a pitfall. You've got to know how to apply that knowledge in a way that moves things towards the greater good. And then, not fall into the abyss of using the information to destroy, which is where we get the stories of the fallen watchers. That's the problem with the story I have with the Anunnaki and the Watchers and the Shining Ones. The Shining Ones is essentially the title that typifies the Watchers and the Anunnaki, or the Lords of Anu, as they were better known. They were called shining people for two reasons. One, because they smeared oil on their skin. They seem to have had a problem with the sunlight here, almost like a sunscreen that they kept applying, which gave the skin a kind of a shining, glowing feature, which is why Enoch, which wasn't his real name, by the way. It was Emed Uwanu was his real name. He basically describes how they had a shining appearance because of the oil in their skin. So they were called shining ones, but they were also nicknamed that because they were much more intellectual than your ordinary average human being. The Watchers get so much of a bad name because of the small group of them, these craftspeople, that decided to, go against the instructions and begin to teach hunter-gatherers the things that hunter-gatherers shouldn't know. For example, weapons and metallurgy and astronomy and mathematics. Because when you start teaching people who are very crude or very elementary some very advanced things about life, they make some very strange bedfellows. And that information can be badly applied. And that's where the information led to terrible wars and all kinds of catastrophes. And in some cases, the complete mismatching of DNA between the mating of some of the Watchers and humans. That's where we get the birth of giants and all kinds of abominations, what people call the Nephilim, which means Orion, by the way, which is a clue as to where these people originally came from. And you find that all around the world as well, that same story about the connection with Orion. But before we diverge, this is a side story. It goes back to the original idea about what were these people trying to teach us. Well, they're trying to teach us that information has to be given on a slow drip feed system. And then when people who are not up to scale on an intellectual and experiential level have the time to assimilate little bits of information, they grow, they appropriate information, and then they are able to apply it in the right way. When you teach people things too fast and too quickly without the understanding and the experience, you create problems. Even today we have that. Technology is a great example where a technology like the internet is now being used to manipulate elections. That's not what it was used for originally. It's the same thing applied today. Hacking and all this information that we have at our fingertips is now being used for completely wrong reasons. Where the technology is so outstripping our ability to understand and our understanding of how this system works that we are now literally pulling the rug from our own civilization by the amount of false news that's going around. I mean, the American election cycle is a great example. I mean, the Russians are already interfering with the next election cycle as we speak. So we're now facing the same problem that the Watchers and the Anunnaki had 11,000 years ago. And unfortunately, it was the few of them that defied orders not to give this information to people, and then also interact and mate with human women, because there was a terrible DNA mismatch that was going on, and they were warned about this. We only get to hear that side of the story. What I've put into the book is the other side, which is let's focus on what they were doing for us, not to us, but for us. And there's a lot of good things. And when you start looking at the Lords of Anu and the Watchers and how they interact with other cultures around the world, you realize these people weren't just in the Middle East. They were based everywhere. It was an international brother and sisterhood. And that's what I found extraordinary. I thought these gods were all local, but no, they were part of the same group of people. And they got around pretty well.
Freddie, let me go back to a question, because this goes back to the origins, because you found there was a particular characteristic that was to all of them, the skulls, the hair. Describe. There was.
Oh, it was extraordinary. I mean, I had no idea. And you only get the sense of what's going on by traveling and asking locally, seeing it from their point of view, and hearing the stories from their point of view and what they call things and what these things mean. So the one thing that I found incredible, whether you're in Peru or in Polynesia or in Southeast Asia or Mesopotamia or Egypt, is the description of these gods. About 8.5 feet tall, they were very, very tall, often with the elongated skull, and naturally so, not like the ones when skulls are shaped by mothers with their children. You see these in Peru, and they look terrible. They look like cone heads. It's not the same thing. And it's now been found that these skulls that have been naturally formed have a 25% greater cubic capacity than the ordinary skull of a human being. Now, you can deform your skull as much as you want and get some kind of result, but you can't change the shape and the cubic capacity of the skull. That just doesn't happen. So these people are obviously genetically different to us. Mm-hmm. Secondly, was the fact that they're all light-skinned, not white-skinned, but light-skinned. Everywhere you go, they talk about the same thing. They were red-haired and green-eyed, sometimes blonde with blue eyes, and they also wore these very simple gowns that went all the way down to their feet, and they also were bearded. Now, when you see beards in the Andes and in certain Polynesian islands, that's a problem, because males genetically cannot grow beards in the Andes, especially around Lake Titicaca. The only people that have those are the progeny of these gods, and they were called the Aymara. And that came straight from my guide in Peru and Bolivia, who basically said, no, the reason why we have beards and nobody else in the Andes has is because we have that understanding that we came from these people originally. And we also escaped the sinking continent in the middle of the Pacific to get to Lake Titicaca. That's why we have the beards. So we have these characteristics that link all these people around the world. So that was the part of that story that began the foundation of the missing lands, to find out who were these people and how were they connected. Well, genetically and physically, they were all the same people.
Yeah, that you can see, like when you look at how the conquistadors managed to invade South America, it was because they were waiting for those sky gods to return.
They looked exactly like the descriptions that they've been handed down from their great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. Yeah, they totally mistook them for the light-skinned people with the beards, shining, because the sun shone on their metal. And it took about a miscarriage of history where 200 guys are able to basically conquer a nation of 40 million people. That's one of the tragedies of life. But it does tell you a lot that the stories were true.
Yeah.
Time ago.
And they got around, Freddie. Talk about that, because if you look at from Indian culture to what you're talking about, the stories from Easter Island, where the birth of the god place, if I got that right, they had their vimanas. They actually had flying ships. How else did we get the same sort of brick and mortar structures all around the world?
Yeah, I mean, the Hopi talk about the flying shields. That's how they describe the ships of the gods. In India, you have the Vimana craft, but in around the Pacific, or what is now the Pacific, because there was a lot of landmass that was there before, according to the local traditions, they talk about, for example, there was a group of people called the Waitaha who came from Easter Island, and no one's heard about them. And the oral tradition was published recently, which I was able to find out when I was in New Zealand. And I was amazed at what these people were writing. They talked about a time before the flood when the gods used to come from a big landmass to the east, which I presume to be either a sunken land or South America. And they arrived on Easter Island as a kind of a stop, a pit stop on the way to somewhere else. And they talk about the islands of Easter Island, not one island, but several islands, back when it was an archipelago. Now, that was over 11,000 years ago. That can be measured by the rise in sea level. And they talk about these urukeu. They were very tall, red-headed, green-eyed, and they used to appear every year on these massive catamarans, the kind of catamarans that you still see being made on Tonga today. So the ships that you see the Pacific people getting around in, they are echoes of a very, very old technology, much smaller than they were, but they're still there, and they're very ocean-worthy. And they said that when Urukeu took on provisions and they talked to the Waitaha and they deposited some of their knowledge with the tribe and moved on, they went to a place called the birthplace of the gods, which is actually in the South Island of New Zealand. And it's been my privilege to have been there 5 times now, and I can't get enough of it. But they said in their traditions that once they were done there, they did not go back to Easter Island because of the way the currents work. They would go all the way back to this enormous land in the east where they already had a big civilization. That brings us to a place called Lake Titicaca, because these people said that whenever they did that journey, they took with them 2 totem birds. One of them, birds called Titi, and one was called Kaka, and that's where the name comes from. And some of the alignments, the astronomical alignments between one of the temples at Lake Titicaca and a place called Tiwanaku, the alignments of the temple gives you a date of about 15,000 BC. So now that puts the date into perspective of the history. There was a civilization already on Lake Titicaca that used to go from there to Easter Island or Easter Islands to New Zealand and all the way back in a big, massive triangle. And by the way, if you do the alignments of these 3 positions, Easter Island forms the golden ratio cut on that trajectory. So it's mathematically chosen to be a staging post for these gods. That's part of the way that they got around. Now, the story gets a bit weirder, because when you look at these people and what they were called in South America, they were called, Viracocha was, of course, one of the post-flood gods, who appears after the flood with 7 people, 7 craftspeople. One of them was his wife and sister. Mm-hmm. Now, there's many places around the world where that story picks up again. One's in Central America and the other one's in Egypt. Osiris was also mated with his wife, who's also his sister. Now, the funny thing is, Osiris's group of people were called the followers of Horus. They were called shining ones, followers of Horus. Well, Viracocha's people called the Haiwaiwapanti. And when I asked the locals, I said, what does that mean? They said, that means the shining people. So now we have a complete connection here between the gods of Easter Island, of New Zealand, of South America, and also Egypt. And they all connect into the same trajectory, using the same methods of propulsion, which is basically large ocean-going vessels. So suddenly, all of these places from 12,000 miles apart are now connected by the same description of the people, the same method of travel, and by the same name as well. I can't make this stuff up.
I know. The interesting part too is when it goes back in the end of your book too, where you connect the Templars and what they were trying to save, and the fact that everybody did get around, and why we think that they didn't is kind of crazy when you look at that.
Absolutely. And Thor Heyerdahl, of course, was preeminent in the modern era to show that yes, you can go on a raft made of reeds. The same design, by the way, you find in Lake Titicaca as you find in the Euphrates and in Egypt. It's the same boat. And he was able to prove, as the other people after him did, that you can go using the currents from South America, from the coast where these Viracocha and his Haiwaipanti used to leave, and go towards Easter Island and Polynesia. So they used to get around the Pacific as easy as you and I go shopping for groceries at the supermarket. It wasn't a big deal for them. And the way that they survived, one of the methods they survived out at sea, apart from obviously fishing, was to take these enormous lengths of rope, and they used to grow mussels on them. And they still do that today in parts of the Pacific. Mm-hmm. So again, an 11-year-old method of surviving out at sea. You have these big lines at the back of your catamarans, and you grow mussels on them. Yummy way to get around.
Yeah. What was, there were two things that one I just forgot. I hate that when that happens. But one is, there's two things that come to mind. One is the portals and the gateways to other worlds. But let me ask you this, because this relates to a skill you have, Freddie, which is most people would not even have a clue. When you touch rocks, when you go to sacred places, they literally tell you their story. And then what you do is you go back and start doing research everywhere to say, did I get that right? Am I correct? Because I think I understand that about you, because that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it can happen to anybody. You just have to be open to accepting that you're not the end all and be all of everything, that the universe is made of much subtle stuff and we're made of the same stuff. And if you just leave yourself open to these ideas, incredible things happen. And when you go to sacred sites as often as I do, I mean, I was on 64 airplanes last year. It's a hell of a lot for a 58-year-old guy. You do begin to accumulate a lot of the energy of place. And every single sacred site in the world, without exception, has been shown that they lie at the confluence of lines of electromagnetic energy. And
Mm.
also, in some cases, geomagnetic hotspots. So you're soaking up that energy all the time, like blotting paper. The more you do it, the more you become attuned to subtleties. And I remember being at Sacsayhuaman, which is one of my favorite places up in Cusco, and talking to a group of people. And I'm trying to teach them about the site. And in my left ear, I can hear someone telling me about what the site is for. Now, this was years ago. And I'm trying to remember what's going on in my left brain and trying to talk with my right and hoping that people realize I'm making sense and I'm not drunk. So after about 30 minutes, I let everybody disappear and I start writing down notes like crazy. Sometimes you get diagrams downloaded and you think, well, that's interesting, but how do I prove this? Well, there's a wonderful mechanism that happens, which I can't explain, but it works, where you go into a library, the right books fall in front of you, and the information is there. It's all there. You just have to, be open to things, magic happening. And sure enough, in the case of Sacsayhuaman, it was about the original name of the place, which means the place of the satisfied falcon, which means nothing to an Andean person because the falcon is not a totem bird of the Andes. But a traveling Egyptian would have gone there and said, oh, that's very interesting. That's the symbol of the god Horus, the enlightened individual that now floats like a falcon over the ground and sees the big picture. The falcon sees the big picture and is able to focus on specific things because you have more information coming at you. Which is why I was being told, look at what I look like from above and look at my original name. Well, when you see Sacsayhuaman from above, it looks like the wings of an outstretched falcon. And the alignments from the Sacsayhuaman also give the two specific dates on the horizon, which are the spring equinox, the alignment of Venus at the spring equinox, and also the winter solstice, which are the two initiation dates around the world in temples where that was practiced, including Egypt. So that was just one of the things that was happening on my journey. The other one was when I was reading the story of the Waitahara, when they finally reached New Zealand, they're talking about the birthplace of the gods and how there was a calendar stone there that they just mentioned it haphazardly. There's a calendar stone somewhere in the middle of the birthplace of the gods. And there's also a tutelary stone, the goddess, the presiding goddess of the site. Now, the thing you have to know about the birthplace of the gods is there are tens of thousands of limestone outcrops. Many of them are undoubtedly shaped by water over time. And because of the way limestone works with water, yes, at certain times of the day with the right light in the right direction, it looks like the shapes of people or animals or things. It's called simulacra. It's a wonderful thing. It's like watching clouds when you're lying down and, you see an angel in a cloud. It's that kind of thing. But when I first went there and I didn't know anything about the story, I could have sworn that some of these rocks looked like they were carved and they're now eroded. And I thought, but I can't prove that. That's very hard to prove and, keep a straight face. Well, that's when I began to read more about the Waitahara's story about the location of the site. And it said that, back in the day, we asked people who came from somewhere in Asia to go down there and carve by hand with rocks about this big the actual deities that form part of our history. And I thought, wow, I could not have made that up and I'm glad I didn't read this before I went there, because now not only could I imagine that some of these stones were the eroded images of people, but now I had a direct reference in someone's history. So now I had a correlation. So the next thing was, how old is the site? Now, every temple in the world memorializes the date of its creation by its main alignment. The trouble is, how do you find the calendar stone, and how the hell do you know what it's looking at and when? That's the problem. Now, there are a bit more digging up of research took place. I found that the two prominent things in the that they looked at in the sky in the southern hemisphere was the Southern Cross, of course, and also the Belt of Orion. If not the entire constellation, but the Belt of Orion specifically is the center of where the souls go to and where they come from, where a lot of the gods apparently also emanated from, and where the knowledge of the tribes comes from. You hear this all around the world, not just in Easter Island and New Zealand, but everywhere around the world. I thought that was more than uncanny, so I figured, okay, I'll start with that. I walked around 3 massive hills for years, didn't find anything that looked like a calendar stone until one day on one specific hill, there's a falcon standing on top of one specific stone. I'm thinking, there's got to be two. It's got to be corny. It's too good to be true. And there's no birds anywhere. There's no falcons anywhere in this valley. There's nothing in this valley. And I figured, why don't I take a look at this stone? And the more I walked up to it, the more I realized this stone doesn't look like it's been shaped by water. It's been carved by people. Yeah. And it looked like a massive disc with a head that you could still see like a sundial propping out of the center of the stone. You can see the eye sockets, the nose, the mouth. And again, maybe it's just the action of water on rock. You don't know. Mm-hmm. But definitely, this is not how nature works. This is not how water works with stone. So I figured, let's take this one. I took the alignments, got the azimuth correct, figure out the background of mountains, and then the rest is just academic. You have to sit there and plot this into an application which tracks the sky and the background, the stars. You plug in the location and the altitude, and you track the sky over time. And then you have to go and drink a lot of tea, a lot of coffee, and wait for something significant to pop up. Well, exactly in 10,800 BC, which is exactly the start of the Younger Dryas, the last catastrophe that generated the last period of glaciation, which is also a momentous date in Egypt, by the way. The first time the belt stars of Orion appear above that headstone, on that stone, and above the background of mountains suddenly appears. I thought, hey, that's a good start. When is the first time that the entire constellation of Orion appears? Exactly on the equinox of 10,400 BC. And the moment that date comes up, all the hairs went up. And I don't have many hairs, but all the rest of the hairs came up and said, my God, I know at least 3 places in the world where that date is very important, because that's at Teotihuacan, and the 3 pyramids of Egypt at Giza, which match the belt stars of Orion exactly on that date, and also at Göbekli Tepe. And I'm thinking, my God, that is a scary, scary correlation, because then I went back to the other main stone, which is their proprietary goddess. And I figured, what was happening when this calendar stone was looking at Orion? What was this stone looking at? And you can see a face still in the stone. It's like a sphinx. And you mark the trajectory. And at the moment that Orion is linked to the calendar stone, the other main constellation, the Southern Cross, rises above the horizon and is linked to this stone. So there's 2 constellations marked by 2 different stones in 2 parts of the valley that give you an X marks the spot moment. So we can definitely prove that the Waitaha were telling the truth, that there were the gods that were going backwards and forwards to New Zealand and Easter Island and South America before the flood, and then they came back to finish the job after the flood had occurred.
Freddy, here's one thing that the audience wouldn't know. You've done another book called The Divine Blueprint, right?
Yes, and the precursor to the Missing Lands, oddly enough.
No, because just give them a taste. Because that book, just like this one, is so well documented and so well, you take all the sacred sites, you've done all the mathematics. So it's not like you just did this book and it's the beginning. You have a treasure trove of books like From the Resurrection that really invite a completely different conversation. So the divine.
I had no idea. Yeah, I didn't plan it this way. It just happens. You just kind of go with the flow of things. I had no idea I'd be writing the exclamation mark to the divine blueprint. I thought that story was done. But it's because the divine blueprint really goes through, it tracks the beginning of sacred space. You know, what is it? Why do we call it sacred space? What makes it different from ordinary space? And who is behind this? What are the stories behind this? How do they relate to each other? Are they connected on a world grid? Yes, they are. And why were they put here? Are they for the benefit of the earth? Yes. Are they for our benefit? Yes. Are they here to help us remember who we are? Yes. Did they heal? Yes. All of the above. Yeah. And I figured, how do we go from these megaliths to where we are now, when we bypass that through the Greek temples to the Gothic cathedrals? Yeah. The Knights Templar, who basically worked with the Cistercians to create the Gothic building period, were literally rebuilding pyramids and Stonehenge in a way that was easily digestible to people of the Middle Ages. You could just do that across Europe and get away with it. You had to make it look like you were honoring the Catholic Church. That's how they got away with it. One of the biggest jokes ever played on the church, by the way.
Freddy, you've got to tell them that you did book on the Templars.
Yes, and then from that, you went off to the Templars, and what were they protecting? They were protecting the same thing that the gods were teaching us. It's the same, it's different people calling themselves different things, working to a different audience. The Gnostics, a society of the Greeks, were the same people. The Essenes were the same people. The Druids were the same people. The Invisible College, the Rosicrucians, they just lived to survive another day by changing. It's a PR exercise. They changed their name to survive. To get it called Scottish Rite Freemasonry.
Okay, but question, why did it become what I'm going to call hermetically sealed? Who was hiding? What are we hiding it from?
They were hiding it from people who didn't know the information, and by not knowing, they would have gained access to dangerous information, because when it's applied in the wrong way, you can create a lot of problems with it. Worse, you can control people with it.
Okay.
That's why it's dangerous, not because that you can sit here and blow things up. Well, you can if you wanted to. That's not why we're here. It was dangerous because you have to go through a process of understanding. You have to go through an initiatic process to understand how to work with the laws of nature. It's a bit like handling plutonium. Plutonium by itself is kind of inert unless you don't know what you're doing with it, and then you can blow up the entire planet. It's the same concept. You have to know what it does, where it comes from, how to apply it safely, and then leave it alone, because it's very dangerous and unstable once you start messing with it.
At your mystery schools?
Yes, and it's also, ancient information is the same thing. It's about the understanding and the manipulation of the laws of nature. The Templars knew about this as well. It's applying the ability of your God-given will and your intent, which is essentially an envelope full of atoms and electrodes, that send your will to a guided source that alters the desired action of a specific thing or a person. For example, if you sit here, if I was to sit here quietly and think of someone, and that my phone would ring in about 3 minutes, that's called the application of attention and intention.
Okay.
It's a very crude demonstration, but it does work. And I hope it doesn't ring, because I haven't switched it off, by the way. But it happens all the time. Or when you're asking for the parking ferry, you're driving along and you think very quietly, I really wouldn't mind a nice parking space in front of the bank. And suddenly, boom, there it is. It's not just a coincidence. That's because you've thought about it. You put attention into specific packet, and you sent that packet along to a location, and you've manipulated things to act on your behalf. That's very crude, but on a much more scientific level, Princeton has done these experiments where a group of 20 people have sat in a room. They've used their focused intent. They've looked at the computer that is giving out a computerized drumbeat. Boom, 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 boom. And this is a peer-reviewed experiment, and I believe it's still available online, where 23 people focused their intent on a computer and they altered the drumbeat of a computer. Now, if you can do that to a machine, imagine what you can do to alter the world for peace, as the Mahavishnu groups have done to try and lower the crime rate in America. And this is well documented as well. You have the intention projects that have been done with Lynn Taggart, which also document the changing of something, of a substance over space and time. These things are telling us that we are able to do all of this. We can apply this information. Now, that knowledge without understanding, okay, given to crude people can do some very, very bad things. It's like the Anunnaki was saying to the Watchers, don't mess around with humans, because if you give them the wrong information at the wrong time, and they haven't had time to assimilate it and understand how to use it correctly, you're going to create problems. And of course it did. It's the same thing. There is a warning. So the only way you can keep this out of the hands of idiots is to indoctrinate them, figure out if their intent is true, and then teach them the finite rules of the game so that it can be applied for the understanding and for the elevation of civilization. We're here to create, not to destroy ourselves. Destruction is easy. Anybody can destroy anything. I can sit here and destroy, this cup just by whacking it. Now, building this cup, that takes effort. That means that you come here to the earth, you incarnate here to do something good. You come here to learn how to build things. And then when you die, you take that knowledge and you apply it somewhere else. Destroying things is easy. It's like a fool's game. But to create, that takes effort. And that's what the gods wanted of us. They wanted us to be like them, to understand the rules so that you can apply it and create better things all the time. And so the universe expands. It becomes all powerful, all knowledgeable. Destroying the universe doesn't only implodes things. The universe goes back on itself, like a child that's been hit by someone. You're going back into your little shell. Well, you can't create out of that. You can only create by expanding. So this is why it was dangerous, because it can't be applied for wrong reasons. Excuse me. I just sat on the floor. There's a lot of dust around.
I'm being
It's a nice floor.
I've gone for a long time with you, and I feel like I keep going forever. So probably I should say, can I do this again?
Absolutely.
There's so much. So here's Freddie. Tell them the name of your books and where they can find you, because you know what, your books are some of my favorite, because they're so well researched. They're so concisive. You make such a compelling connections and weaves between things that most people just don't do. And
it's time and effort. It has to take time. It's a bit like waiting for a book from me is like waiting for an album from Boston. But when you get it, it's usually quite good.
Oh, it's meaty.
8 years for an album, yeah, but it takes you the time to craft. Yeah, I mean, you can get them at invisibletemple.com, along with the accompanying documentaries as well. Yeah, research takes time. It's you have to look beyond the normal places. You don't go on the internet. You certainly don't go to Wikipedia and places like that, and certainly don't get off YouTube. You have to go and look under strange rocks. And if you ask local people and keep the academics, one arm's breadth away. Not to say that they're all bad, but it does become very myopic when you sit in front of a desk and try to quote people that have had papers written. It doesn't get you. It only gets you so far. You have to go out and walk and talk to the people that know stuff, like the Maya, for example. The Maya's still here. They're still alive. You just have to go to Guatemala and find out where they are and then ask them questions. And my God, do they know things that we don't? And that's what I like about this research, because when you see it from their point of view, things begin to connect. And it's those connections that make our lives so much more interesting.
And well, you also have a video called The Portal.
Portals, yes, which is the scientific evidence of how temples work. And believe me, the Egyptians always said, the temple, yeah, it's built of rock, but that's not what it is. The temple's a living, breathing organism. They treated it like a person. And you wonder, what were they smoking to say something like that? Well, now that we can measure the energy of these things, you realize they were absolutely right. You have to treat them with great respect, these pyramids and these temples, because they do things for you. But wrongly applied, they'll do things to you as well. So they're very self-protective.
When you think of Maya and you think of geometry, because that's really how we're formed, is geometry. We consume geometry, and the way our food, everything that's formed has got information, is information. So all these things, inform each other. So when you start realizing that everything in itself is living, that's where I think I came to the terms where I understood is like, how could all be God? Well, because it is all God. It's all those formula, how he creates things, and you find many icons.
God is in the details, as Islamic culture says. Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
That's why so many cultures around the world express God, it, through geometry, through mandalas. At an Islamic temple, a mosque expresses Allah through geometry, not as a person as we do in the Christian world, which is a completely wrong idea, but as a formless entity that's shaped by geometry. A Tibetan would look at the same geometry in a mosque and go, I get that. And they'll talk to their Hopi cousins and say, hey, there's mandalas. It's like, well, the way we describe the universe, and they're absolutely right. And if you take the head of, let's say, a pen, look at that under the electron microscope, what you'll see is this geometric lattice, which resembles a mosque or the tile work in a mosque. So yes, God is in the details. Once you understand nature and its fundamental laws, which are very simple, now you understand how it works. If you understand how it works, you can apply it.
Actually,
very simple, and yet paradoxically complex.
Freddie, I've done that part. That part is my book. That part, when I show you how simple it is, from the way you speak in the geometry, when you speak in platonic solids, to how it is that nature unwinds and how it uses the golden ratio to create the body, to create the eyes, how the geometry in outer space and the inner space, as above, so below, so within, which is the Hermetic principles, I show it in spades. So my book is not a book like yours. It's just, as somebody describes it, an encyclopedia of how things weave, because I'm a bit dyslexic. It's all pictures.
A lot easier than words.
Your words are great, though. So
words just get in the way. In fact, the Egyptians invented the pun because they said words can be mischievous. They can represent something, but they are not what that thing is. That thing is about vibration. Vibration is formless. It's self-referencing. It means what it says. Yeah. Words can alter the outcome of the perception of the object you're trying to describe. So be careful when you use that. And that's why we invented the pun. So when you get too caught up with words, you can make fun of words.
Well, Freddie, it's been great talking with you. Thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure. And I've had the pleasure of actually meeting Freddie before. And he's quite the character. You have a rare combination of humor, wit, smart, and it would be somebody you would never, ever, ever, ever want to play Trivial Pursuits with, because you got a photographic memory.
Yeah, but I'm crap at sport.
That's okay.
It's those sport questions in Trivial Pursuit that always get me.
Oh, the sport ones? Yeah. Well, whatever. I know it's the history part, but in my family, the history stuff runs, so you could go play with them. Actually, you've met my son. You guys, I don't think I got an award in Edgewise that night.
Oh, he's great fun. I like him.
Anyway, that was quite a few years ago.
He is a god.
Well, you know what? He's got a brain like that. He's brilliant. His mind for history is, I mean, I'll put it this way. At that time, he was probably 16 or 17, and he kept up with you pretty good.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, I was very impressed with him.
Yeah, no.
Nice to see young people get into the rhythm of the quest.
Well, for the time he was in grade 2, he could beat civilization. For some reason, that was his thing. So what can I say? I had to keep up with him. He taught me. I didn't teach him. So anyway, thank you. Thanks,
Karen. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, and find Freddie at invisibletemple.com.
That's right.
That's right, because I think freddysilva.com happens to be your art site.
Ah, my art photography, which I really have to update. That website is a bit old and moldy now, but the pictures are still nice though.
You need to put a link over to this one though.
I just need to, well, the technology that was used to create it, I can't even open it myself. I have to actually create a new website. And I'm trying to put together a coffee table book on the 26,000 photographs of sacred sites I've photographed. And I got to get on with that one at some point. But as you can imagine, it's quite an endeavor. Because just when you think you have 120 pictures, choice photographs, then you go away on another trip and you've got another 50. So it's never ending.
I know, but yeah, I could think about it in the way that would make it so compelling for people to see contrast and same and then it would be the next concept, because it is art as fact. And you have a lot of it in your book, comparison images where they can compare and go, oh, whoa, right? And so that would make it kind of like almost a history book and and not just photographs, but it would actually blow people's mind. And the good thing anyway, if you did it, you could still put it online at first so that people could actually see it.
Yeah, I'm just very old fashioned. I like the analog book. So you can sit there having a nice coffee and on a table and turn the pages. Of course, the shipping would be extraordinary because these things are so heavy.
Yes, right. That was my problem with my book. I had to actually put it back on Amazon just for European stuff. So, and it's not glossy that way, and that just disturbs my soul. But there was, I had to compromise at some point. So, yeah.
Pearl finish, darling. Pearl finish.
No, I'm gonna